Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 162, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
Now, on today's show, we're going to be taking you back to a simpler time.
A time where guys had massive perms, where the manager would drive the guys home and have a plate of chips afterwards. He'd lock them in a room, force them to drink champagne before the cup final.
When he went to see a game of football, it was probably about, £5 to get in, probably? He went through the turnstiles and he had the football rattle standing up in the stands. We're talking about football in the 80s today.
Weeing in a bottle.
I think the toilets were generally like a bucket, weren't they? Yeah, at best. Yeah. So today, the reason we're talking about football in the 80s is because we're going to be talking about one of the most famous and earliest football management simulators.
Yeah, so this is Football Manager, and it's not the one that you see in the shops now, Football Manager 2019. But this is the original one, and we talk about the kind of development of all the different aspects of the game. You know, this was a really hard kind of game to put out there. You know, how do you make something exciting?
Yeah.
And it's seen as, if you're not into football, not that interesting. But Dan, he's not that much of a football guy. He absolutely loved the interview today, didn't you?
This interview is so fascinating. I mean, for me, like you said, I've never been a real big football fan. I mean, my family were, my dad and my uncle. And I remember, Saturday afternoons watching Saint and Greavesy on TV, and we go to football matches. I did go to a few as a kid. I always loved the atmosphere of it. And, I actually do prefer playing probably video game football to watching it on TV, to be honest.
Yeah, I used to go to matches and stuff with my family and everything, but then I really got into it just near university period and kind of really got into football then. But also I never really got far with the modern Football Manager games. I'd always try and get the rubbish teams and bring them up to really high levels, and that was incredibly hard to do.
I just think football back then, in the 80s, it seemed to be full of characters, didn't it?
Yeah, it seemed to be full of characters, and they all weren't multimillionaires like they are now, so they're all not prima donnas.
So get yourself a little plastic cup of Bovril, and today we're going to be reminiscing on those early 80s kind of football memories and talking about Football Manager with the original author, Kevin Toms, and also we'll find out about his new version, Football Star Manager. If you love that original game, it's back.
Yeah, and this is on mobile phones, and it's doing fantastically well at the moment. You might recognise Kevin because he used to have his bearded face plastered on every kind of piece of merchandise back then.
And why not?
Yeah, definitely.
So we're going to be catching up with him. He lives in New Zealand today, so another call that we're doing, halfway around the world again. Seems to be a bit of a trend recently, doesn't it? So he's going to be coming up. Kevin Toms talking about the history of Football Manager, coming up on the Retro Hour podcast in the next 15 minutes. Now, we've got some really cool news stories to talk about this week, including the rebirth of one of the most legendary 90s Amiga magazines. It's back in a new form, Amiga Power.
Ooh, and also a Tetris player that's got further than anybody ever in the world.
All these years later.
Yep.
So we'll talk more about them in just a minute. Now, before we do, let's give a big thank you to the people who make it possible for Ravi and I to come in here, get away from our day-to-day life. But we can come in here every week and update you on what's happening in the world of retro and talk to our childhood heroes as well. We love doing this show. But the only reason that we can keep doing it is thanks to your support. Now, we do have a little tip jar on the front page of our website at theretrohour.com. Any amount that you donate into there, big or small, it all goes into the pot and helps us with the running of this podcast. And for doing it, making a little donation, you will find your place in the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Like this week,
Franklin Hares,
Paul Edwards,
Graham Beresford,
and Andreas Sunner, who all made donations into the running of the show. And you can do the same. We've got a little supporters link on the front page of our website at theretrohour.com. Now let's talk about this amazing Nintendo Classic map site that you found.
Yeah.
I've been playing around with this for hours today.
Well, as we know with Nintendo, everything seems to go down really quickly. So I hope this is available on Friday when we talk about it. This is noclip.website, and it's an absolutely amazing idea. It's actually, we used to do this quite a lot on the Amiga when we were kids, but it's the levels.
Yeah.
But it's a full kind of version of the level that you can fly through and explore. And they've got tons and tons of Nintendo games on this. When it used to be bitmaps, you used to be able to look at the bitmaps and see all the different parts of the level. Now you can spin around in 3D and see everything.
This goes back, I'm looking at the list of games I've got on here. Stuff like, Mario Kart on the DS, the GameCube, Mario Kart Double Dash, Luigi's Mansion, stuff on the Wii, back to the N64. Even a couple of Sega games on here as well. Got like Sonic Mania has been mapped by them, which, is a very recent game. But yeah, the idea is that you can get an overview of these maps and these kind of courses of racing games and that kind of thing, look at them overhead and zoom in and follow the track around and check out the different areas of them too.
Go into areas you've never been in.
Yeah.
And just kind of see if there's any secrets or, little map glitches or anything like that.
And it looks amazing as well. I mean, really high resolution scans that they've done of these levels too.
Yeah, it's a full open source project. So, this has been all kind of compiled by one guy called Jasper, and he's just keeping it going. And they're saying, will this newfound fame on social media kind of cause Nintendo to take it down? And as you've heard, Bowser's now in charge of Nintendo. So
Bowser, I don't think.
So they're saying is anything's going to go these days. You don't know.
I mean, they've got, current stuff on there like Mario Odyssey and stuff, which I imagine might anger Nintendo a little bit. Hopefully not. Because, this is a cool little fan project. And I think from my perspective, there are two really good things about this. Number one, if you want to kind of, if you're lost in a game, obviously it's quite handy for that. But also from a perspective of looking how level design's done in games.
Yeah, it could be a good kind of learning tool as well.
Yeah, and, if you are, that's why we do this show. We're a little bit kind of interested in the backstory of games and how they work and the technology, We're nosy guys. We like to look at stuff like this, so hopefully Nintendo will leave it alone.
Yeah, I hope so.
If not, there's a couple of Sega things in there. Need to get more Sega stuff. Sega are always fine with everything.
I'll just put Amiga stuff up. No one cares.
Yeah, you can map them. Yeah, dead easy in Doug's Paint, couldn't you? So if you do want to check out the site, I'll put it in this week's show notes at theretrohour.com. Check it out while you can.
Well, all the old Worms levels, you could actually put them into Deluxe Paint and edit them and mess about with those, yeah.
Yeah, me and my brother used to do that. Rude drawings in the background and things. What's that worm standing on? Anyway, talking about the Amiga, let's chat a bit about Amiga Power. Now, that was back in the day. Did you read Amiga Power?
No, I didn't, but I heard of Amiga Power by Amiga Power readers or people who go, have you read this? It's so shocking.
It used to be, the strapline was the magazine with attitude.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is they didn't really care who they annoyed. They didn't feel the pressure to give games high ratings if they didn't want to. They annoyed a lot of people. I think they were in Team 17 on a bit of a fallout publicly on using it.
I remember we went to a talk held by Amiga Power at the Guardian building.
We did.
That was awesome.
Yeah, a couple of years ago now, wasn't it? Still a lot of interest in it. And I think out of all the kind of British Amiga magazines back in the 90s, for many people that's the most fondly remembered. And now the good news is, all these years later, Amiga Power is back. In a new form. It's coming out as an album. Now, we've actually got on the phone the man who is behind the relaunch of Amiga Power as a double music CD, Matthew Smith. Welcome to the show.
Hello there.
Now, tell us about your kind of memories of Amiga Power then. I guess you were a big fan of it back then.
Huge fan, yes. I started reading it just before I got my actual first home computer, which was an Amiga 500 Plus, back in late 1991. And it was one of the first magazines I picked up, and I just loved it straight away. This was back in the day when it was still the original editor, Matt Bealby, and it was pretty much right from the start, exactly as it went on to be, just full of really imaginative features, incredibly incisive and uncompromising reviews, and a really sort of a pleasing streak of sort of irreverent humour, which really appealed to me. And as the years went on, I just grew to love it more and more, because they actually would not kowtow to games publishers. They said what they thought. They got into a certain amount of hot water with various publishers who tried to sue them and stop them from
I remember.
even reviewing their games, trying to stop them sending them review copies and issuing them with writs and so on. But they wouldn't. They would never sort of back down, and the humour just became more and more sort of prevalent in the magazine as it went along. It's been a big part of my life, really. A big inspiration to me. That's partly the reason that I decided to go into journalism and publishing myself, which I've been doing for about the last 18 years, and enjoying very much.
Well, well, let's talk about this Amiga Power, the album. So what was kind of the inspiration to launch this project, and what is it exactly? It kind of started a few years back. A friend of mine invited me to help put together an Amiga remix project that he was working on.
and in the role of co-producer. And I enjoyed the experience enormously, and I decided I wanted to try and put together an Amiga remix project of my own. And it just immediately occurred to me that Amiga Power is the ideal sort of subject for it, to create a kind of tribute album. And that's exactly what I'm aiming to put together. It essentially takes the form of a two-disc set, and it's split between two different kind of approaches, if you like. The first disc is a collection of Amiga remixes based on game tunes suggested by former Amiga Power contributors. I've been in touch with lots of the old writers, including the original Ed Matt Bealby, Stuart Campbell, Mark Ramshaw, Cameron Stanley, Rich Pelly, Mill Millington, Gary Penn, Kieran Gillan, and they were all incredibly happy to help, and they all came up with a short list of their favourite game tunes, and from there I was able to kind of work out which ones we could potentially get remixes of, working out sort of the licensing agreements and getting hold of the original musicians and so on, and just making the arrangements to either get the original musicians to do their own remixes, which we've done wherever possible, or if the original musician either wasn't able to do it because they're not working in music or they just didn't have the time, and getting someone else to do it in their stead. That's all worked out very well. And the second CD was kind of inspired by Amiga Power's cover discs. They had all kinds of wonderful games and demos and things on their discs over the years, and so the second CD is all remixes based on things that they gave away on their cover-mounted discs.
And just looking at some of the names of the musical talents that you've kind of got on the list, it reads like a game screen when I was a kid. You've got just some amazing people on there. I can't believe it. You've got Jerome Tell as well. You've got Olaf Gustafsson as well. I've not heard of him for years.
Chris Hillsbeck, Alistair Brimble.
Yeah. John Hare. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, everyone's been really, really sort of helpful and very keen to get involved. And this kind of goes back to, say, when I was working with this other project, just kind of getting in touch with people and just finding that they had still such affection for the Amiga and the music that they created back then. Amiga Power as well, because obviously a lot of people who are working on the remixes, and they were big fans of the magazine too.
Well, I mean, obviously, I imagine Future Publishing still own the copyright. I mean, have they kind of endorsed this? Have you been in touch with them?
They haven't endorsed it exactly, but it is licensed from them. But I had to get in touch with them to obviously make sure they were okay with us using the Amiga Power name and logo. And so we worked out a licensing agreement with them. That's all been taken care of. They're very helpful, actually. I think they were quite interested in they would want to do something like this. So it's a bit unusual, but they were great. They really were sort of very, very helpful throughout the whole process.
Maybe inspire them to relaunch a magazine again. You never know.
Well, you never know. It'd be nice. I think there has been talk very sort of vaguely in the past about something like an Amiga Power annual or something like that. Yeah. And if the album does well, it'd be nice, perhaps, if it could sort of springboard off into something like that. I'd love to see it.
Well, this looks incredible. I mean, the Kickstarter is going to be starting next Friday. You're aiming for March the 8th?
Aiming for March the 8th at the moment. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure at the moment if it's definitely going to hit that. That's certainly what I'm going for. Just ironing out a few little odds and ends at the moment, just finishing up the Kickstarter video and getting all the pledge bonuses sorted out. But yeah, that's certainly the aim at the moment, Friday, March the 8th.
Excellent. Well, I'll put all the information in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Matthew, good luck with it. We can't wait to see it. Sounds really exciting.
Thank you very, very much indeed. I really appreciate it.
Now, you found something really cool this week, Ravi. Not very often that we talk about new programming languages on this podcast, but tell us about Script 8.
Well, I don't know if you'd heard of Pico 8. Pico 8 was kind of released on a lot of devices, and it was a really nice little language, just with a limited amount of sprites, a limited area, and you'd be able to create different retro games and distribute them. Well, Script 8 seems to be a JavaScript-based kind of version of Pico 8. So it's open source, it's browser-based, and you basically create these tiny cassettes. So each game is in a cassette form. And it's fantastic because it has a feature, and it's kind of like live coding. So you can code straight away and it will appear on the screen. I think it's fantastic for kids to be able to learn how they're changing the code can directly change the screen.
Yeah.
And also this little tape section is great for distributing, which you can just send someone your little tape, and then they've got a version of your small little retro game.
It's like a URL it generates. That's really awesome.
With all the stuff in the kind of little package. And they're saying it's heavily influenced by Pico 8 and it's open source as well.
I'm looking at the aesthetic of it as well. It's, there's kind of very retro 80s sprites and very low colours as well. I mean, look at it, there's only about like 8 colours in some of these little demos I've got, which one thing I love about these kind of limitations is it really makes it be creative.
Yeah, and it breaks it down into each little section. So at the top, they've got the cassette, and then they'll have the code section, an art section, a music section. So you can create your little beats on a little kind of tracker, and then or a little beat maker, and then you can draw your pixels as well, and then you can code it on the other one with live coding.
I'm meant to have family over this weekend. I just want to play with this now. I could literally mess around with that all weekend.
You need to make the Retro Hour platformer. That's what we need.
Or if anyone has got any hot skills, that would be awesome. Do you know, like AVGN's got a video game about him, hasn't he? Yeah, what could we do in a game, though?
Oh, who knows? It's just going to be a really rude one with us two. I don't know.
Ravi on the mad hunt for guests through levels. So if you want to check out Script 8, it looks really cool. And again, it's another open source project that people are just putting out there for the fun of it. And I think it's awesome. So if you're doing to check that out, maybe get your kids involved as well. It looks really good. I'll stick that link in our show notes as well. Now, before we get into our chat about Football Manager with Kevin Toms, who'd have thought we'd get a new world record on Tetris in 2019?
Yeah, so I hope I'm saying his name right. Joseph Saley basically was able to beat the Tetris kill screen. So everybody thought that Tetris ended on screen 29. Yeah. That was it. It ends on screen 29. But he managed to go past screen 29 live on Twitch, and he reached level 33, which is an unknown height. And whilst he was streaming as well, he was kind of chatting to people on stream whilst playing it. That's really crazy.
So this is Tetris on the NES, on the NES.
Yeah.
This game came out in 1989. So 30 years later, people didn't even realise the game had a kill screen.
Right, well, that was the kill screen that they thought, level 29, but it went beyond.
That's awesome. And he's only 16 years old as well.
Yeah, so he must have just been training on it. And can you imagine how good he's going to be on the new Tetris?
Yeah, the Tetris 99 that everyone's playing at the moment. Isn't that where you go on and you play against 99 other players?
Yeah. Like a battle royale, yeah.
Oh, my God. I wouldn't want to be in a game with this guy, though.
No, it'd be you and him trapped, and it'd be...
I'm thinking it's probably reading this news item, because we've talked about him on the show before. Do you reckon Steve Wozniak's reading that going, damn!
Damn, I need to get my skills in.
Because a lot of people don't know that. He's actually one of the best Tetris players in the world, isn't he?
Yeah. He practiced Tetris a lot, and he spends a lot of time on it, but he never got to level 33.
Up your game was. So there's actually a little video here as well on readretro.com. So if you want to check him out. I think it's cool as well that a 16-year-old kid is playing a game that's like, double his age, pretty much.
Yeah, and also that with the kind of live streaming and stuff now, you can't have any doubt behind it. It's like he just did it live on the screen there,
Not like back in the day when you'd write to a magazine and just add a couple of zeros at the end of your score. I never did that.
No.
About Ravi, what about? So, if you want to check out that and the rest of this week's stories, we'll put them all in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Right then, let's get nostalgic. Can you smell the grass already? Let's take you back to the 80s. Ravi's got his perm wig on with Kevin Toms, the man behind Football Manager. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome on our very special guest this week. Welcome to the show, Kevin Toms.
Good morning.
Good evening for us here in the UK, of course, because we're crossing to... you're in New Zealand, aren't you?
I am right now, yes, I am. Yeah, so it's actually early in the morning for me.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's we do love doing these weird time zone crossovers, because we're getting ready to go to bed, and you're on your breakfast cereal.
Yeah, it's a lovely sunny morning starting up.
Well, I mean, kind of going back to, we'll get into some stories about Football Manager and, those classic old school days. But first of all, I mean, just to get a little bit of background, let's find out a bit about your early geek pedigree. What was your first computer?
First computer, home computer, was the Video Genie, which is a Tandy TRS-80 clone, quickly followed by a ZX81. The Tandy TRS-80 was an American... obviously Tandy brand, and a Video Genie I think was, I'm trying to remember, it's an Asian brand, but I can't remember which country it was now. Mm-hmm. They basically cloned it. They got away with cloning it. And at the first point of creating Football Manager on a home computer, I thought that would be a market for it. And then the ZX81 came along Because when I did actually launch the game on the Video Genie. Well, actually, I didn't say that. I said TRS-80. Everybody on a Video Genie knew it played TRS-80 software. And I put it out on both machines for about 3 or 4 months. I sold 300 on the ZX81 and 3 on the TRS-80 Video Genie.
Well, we'll go into that in a sec. But first, I just want to ask you, who did you support? And did you go to many football matches as a kid?
Yeah, Torquay United.
Ah, nice.
That's where I grew up. So that's where I grew up, was Torquay, Paynton, actually. And so Torquay United were my team. So I'm used to suffering. I'm used to not expecting much, getting a promotion is a rare event. And at the moment, they're in effectively Division 6, which is pretty shocking. They're doing well in Division 6. But, that's my original team. I did actually... because I was in Bournemouth for a while, I started going to see Bournemouth, and so I'm also a sort of second fan of AFC Bournemouth as well, which is a little bit higher up.
Well, in terms of games that you used to play, I mean, what kind of stuff were you playing on your machine when you were a kid? Then, before you got into programming, I mean, were you into text adventures? Were they an influence on you?
No, this is interesting. I was a programmer before I got the computer.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think most people who wrote computer games started learning how to write computer games on some kind of home computer. But I was a professional programmer programming mainframes and UNIVAC and IBM mainframes at the time, if I remember rightly. So I already had programmed COBOL and all the stuff like that. So the home computers were like a new thing for me to work with rather than what I learned on. And I'd sort of play. I remember there were text adventures, things like that, and I can also very clearly remember the first Space Invaders machines being in the pubs where I used to go, and mastering that as well, and being disappointed when all that happened when you finally beat it was it started again a little bit faster. Yeah,
that was such a phenomenon though when that game came along, I imagine.
It was, yeah, it was. We used to spend a lot of time trying to play that, and it was great. Yeah, it was quite something at the time.
I imagine after learning COBOL, Z80 assembly or machine code must have been like a breeze to learn.
Well, actually, Football Manager was programmed originally in BASIC because it wouldn't have made any sense. I did do some assembler in different ways, but it didn't make any sense to program a strategy game in an assembler. So I did it in the native BASIC on the machines, which was one of the few games I think that was done in the native BASIC. But it's much better because it's essentially a strategy game with a lot of mathematics in it. And that was much better for modifying rather than battling with binary all the time. But the first language I learned was PL1, so it goes even further back.
In the 80s, the kind of football managers, they were like larger-than-life characters. You had Ron Atkinson and Brian Clough and all these kind of guys. It must have seemed a lot more kind of fun and arty, the idea of a football manager back then.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing started for me way back as a board game anyway. So, it's, I've been sort of interested in it as a game concept for a very, very long time. I just thought it was, very appealing to play the role of manager. And you're right, yeah, they were characters then. It was a good era in many ways. It was a good era for computer games because it was a kind of foundation era. But also, it was before the big money came in to football as well. So I always thought that to be a pundit, the whole point was you had to be opinionated and possibly annoying on TV. You didn't have to be any good. You just have to be opinionated. So it still seems to be true, I think.
Well, when you were making the original Football Manager, I mean, what was kind of the idea behind it then, and what inspired you to make that game, and what was the first text-only version like?
Well, as I say, the roots of it are actually a board game, and I could never get the mechanics right on a board game. And then when I got my hands on home computers, I immediately thought, this will calculate the league table for me, and this will work out the fixture list for me, and this is far better than trying to sort of make up, when you win, you got 3 positions or something like that on a board game, and so it was a freedom, and I did do it as you said. The first one was ZX81, very limited memory, 16K, and had to limit the number of teams. I think it was 8 per division. And the only way I could play the match and fit everything in was to do it as text. So I did it as a bit like the teleprompter on the BBC results, if I remember rightly. I wasn't using the sort of ticker tape effect, but a delay as the goals came up. And it was deliberately creating tension while you were waiting to see what happened as a result of your decisions. And it worked. And some people still want to play it with the text-only version, even now.
It's very interesting because, like, people used to experience football in a very different way. Like you said, they'd be either watching teletext or something like that, or they'd be listening to it on the radio, having to imagine the match going on, and that kind of built the drama in the right way. It was relevant to that.
Yeah. I mean, there is drama in it, quite a lot of drama in football. That's why it's so much fun. And there's drama in the matches, there's drama in the league tables, there's drama in the cups. It's a good escape from reality in that way. But it's a very interesting sport.
So when you ported it to the Spectrum, I mean, was that kind of the point when you decided to add some kind of graphics to show match highlights?
Yeah. No, I can remember doing that very clearly. I can remember where I was working on it in the little flat in Milton Keynes, the one-bedroom flat that I had at the time. And I basically got hold of the Spectrum and decided I had this idea that I could do this. Because basically the goals popping up one by one was a kind of match highlights. I always thought match highlights would be good because that's the excitement of the game, the highlights part. And I thought, well, maybe I could do something where people are actually running up and scoring the goals. So having, not being a great artist, I used to draw stickmen footballers when I was a kid to sort of, just to draw match action. I picked up the same idea and obviously people, the graphics weren't so great in those days. And so I drew these little stickmen and worked out how to make them run, and then drew the lines of the pitch. And then the whole thing then was to create, within a great deal of limitations of memory and what you could do, some kind of players running up and shooting at the goal and trying to score the goal. And that was a big innovation, actually. I mean, it was only a few months after I launched the original text version, because I think I was doing that in August, September of 1982. And it took me a couple of months to add that in and then take advantage of the memory to expand the number of teams. So I doubled the number of teams and then brought out the Spectrum, of course, and, with some color as well. I added in a lot of color, like using the team colors where possible of their actual strips in their names. It worked very well. Yeah, it was very, very popular.
It was exactly like kind of watching the highlights on TV, and you'd kind of think, oh, is he going to make it? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Go, every time it would be different.
Yeah, I mean, every time it'd be different. It's a very important part. I mean, I had people say to me time to time, oh, you knew when it went a certain way this was going to happen. No, that's not true. It was programmed to be infinite. There was no, because the decisions were made as the match, as the players played. There was no pre-programming of what was going to happen. I deliberately designed it that once a player started running with the ball or kicking the ball, it was at that moment he decided what was going to happen. So you couldn't be sure, no matter what was happening. I mean, if it was, a difficult angle maybe, but even then that wasn't certainty at all.
But was it the very first football management game?
I don't know. It was the very first football management game, for example, on computers. There may have been others, but it was certainly the first successful one.
How did people react to it then? 'Cause it's I imagine looking at it from an outsider, you must be thinking, how's this game going to kind of work then? I mean, did it take a bit of time for people to get their head around the concept?
Oh yeah, very much so. Because what most other people were doing at the time was they were taking a known concept like Space Invaders we mentioned, or some other known arcade game, and trying to adapt it to the smaller computer format. And this concept of a actual strategy game based on football, I used to go to the microcomputer fairs, and I would literally, people would come up and they'd see it was text, so it wasn't obvious what it was, and they'd ask me about it, and I had to explain it to people, explain what it was, and then they got interested. And then a nice thing started to happen, which was people then sit down and start playing it, and they would get hooked and be playing it for a long time, and others would notice that and watch what they were doing, and then they used to start explaining to people what they were doing. So they were doing the selling for me. You say, oh, this is a game I played. You do this, this, and this, But yeah, I mean, they were surprised. Most people were surprised at how much was in it, how many things were in it for that time. But it did require at least 16K and then 48K. At first, it was an explanation, and of course, then people started to get to know the game.
Well, today, I mean, if a footballer gives their name to a video game or they feature in it, they charge millions of royalties. Adding real player names back then, did you see that as like a possible legal issue, or did it just not even...
It just wasn't at that time. I mean, there wasn't really much... or was it only their surnames? I can't remember whether I put their initials, but, I mean, I don't think they had the value then, but as they do now, as the brands they are now. But no, these sort of things, there were no issues at that time.
It was a very complex game. So, your standard platformer would just have a level and you'd have to get to the end and there'd be different elements. But in this game, you had injuries that would slowly decrease the squad. You'd have to do budgeting. You'd have the FA Cup as well as the league. Which aspect did you enjoy kind of making the most out of all of those?
I think enjoy making... I think the thing that I enjoyed is that, in fact, you're touching on it there, that although there are a lot of elements in it, they all interact. And that's how I like to make a game. So it seems simple, but there's a lot of interaction. Every little piece affects the gameplay. So I think that's the key thing. And so... when I say affects the gameplay, my aim all the time is to make it entertaining. So I do all of the design from the point of view of being entertaining. And, so an example might be, you say there's the cup. Well, in the cup, you will have to use up the fitness of your players to succeed. So that will potentially counteract your success in the league. So those balances... I like to have all over the place in the game. So even on quite a apparently straightforward game, there's a lot of subtle elements working together. And that's probably my most interesting area.
Well, did you see any funny uses of the customizing tools? I mean, for example, a royal family football team or something like that?
I didn't see them because, unfortunately, we didn't have the internet then. But people have told me about them and told me they would, do ridiculous sponsors of clubs and things like that. But or naming of clubs, and I think people have told me about some things. Like, obviously the idea was you could put all your favorites in, so they could put their own players in, and they'd make different leagues and things like that. Yeah, so people did, but I didn't see so much of it because, as I say, that was one thing you didn't have then was the communication. People were writing letters would be what I would get.
Addictive Games was set up to publish this. Was it set up by you? Yeah. And what was the whole aim of the company?
Actually, the name of the company came from Football Manager itself because I was basically lying in bed on a Saturday morning thinking I need to name the company that sells this game. What will I call it? And I thought, well, it seems to be very addictive to people. And then I thought, well, why don't I call the company Addictive Games? So yeah, that's how it came about. And it was just the vehicle to sell Football Manager.
Why did you decide to self-publish then?
I don't think there was any other option. I mean, I never. There were no. This was it. I mean, this game came out at the beginning of establishing the games industry. For example, when I launched the game in January 1982, there were no shops selling computer games, no retail outlets at all, and it's hard to believe. So the only way you could sell was by mail order. All of the sales were by mail order. I advertised in Computer and Video Games magazine, which is a long-living magazine, but then that was an early way of doing it. Within a few months at the computer fairs that I went to, the small microcomputer fairs, then an odd retailer would come up and say, "Oh, I'm going to open a shop to sell computer games, and I'd like to stock your game, but we'd like slightly different packaging because we need to hang it up on a little rack and things like that." And so I'd start producing slight variations of the game packaging. And by the end of the year, I mean, I was talking to, Smiths and Boots about stocking in their stores. But at the beginning of the year, there was no shop in the country to sell.
I mean, were you hiring like cassette duplication plants, or were you doing it like yourself at first?
I was doing it myself at first. I can remember, as I said, I had a 1-bedroom flat, and it used to take about 15 minutes to record, if I remember rightly. And I used to be watching TV, and I switched the tape recorder on, and it literally was in the bedroom to record the game. And I'd listen because of that buzzing noise it made. So I kind of subliminally was listening to it. I was doing other things, and then I would hear when it ended, and then I go and make another one. I can remember buying 300 cassettes from Tandy.
Wow.
To make them.
You must have been pleased with the kind of initial success of it. Eventually, you sold 500,000 copies. I don't know if you were doing them all yourself. And you also won a Golden Joystick Award.
Yeah, it was actually, I think, more than that sold. But yes, yes, it did. Yes, it was. I was up against a runner-up, actually, because I was up against The Hobbit, which is very interesting since I'm now sitting here in New Zealand. Mm. But Melbourne House's Hobbit. We shouldn't have been in the same category. I mean, different games. But but it was early days. But yes, that's true. That happened as well.
Well, you kind of continued this simulation and strategy kind of vibe. I mean, the next title was Software Star, which was a game publishing strategy game. I mean, was that kind of influence from what you've been doing in your day-to-day job?
Yeah, I thought it was, yes, it was. And I thought it would be a fun sort of thing to write about. And in fact, a lot of people still write to me about that game, tell me they really love that game. And they've asked me to redo it as well. But it is. It was inspired by that. And I thought I'd try and get the fun elements of business into it, again, because, I mean, obviously day-to-day business is a lot of just work, but I wanted to make the fun elements of it, so with charts and trying to boost your game and produce the games, and it was good. It was fun to do that.
Yeah, because I know at that time, the emergence of like the UK software industry, it kind of, I remember, documentaries I've seen and reading articles and everything, it kind of felt like, these software houses and programmers coming through like the new kind of rock stars.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, there was people often ask me, why did I end up putting my picture on the game? Well, I didn't do that. And it was actually when I was attending computer games shows, and I would be talking about, the game and explaining it to people. I'd say I did this or I did that. And they say, did you write it? And I say, yeah. He said, oh, wow, I really love this game. And they'd start talking to me about it. And that would happen quite often. And I sort of made a connection in my mind. And somebody asked me about it recently. And I think it's a very clear connection when you think about it. I thought, well, book authors have their names and pictures on the cover. And musicians don't hide away. They're there because they write the music. I thought, well, what's the difference with computer games? Surely it's a style. And, I'm proud of this work. Why shouldn't I say I wrote this? And so that's how I started. But it was innovative at the time. And, it had quite an impact. I still think it was a good move, and I think there should be more of it. I just think that corporate keeping everybody in line was a way not to do it, reason not to do it. But I think it's the way it should be done.
How did Addictive grow as a publisher then? Did you start getting approached by people?
Eventually, but it just grew it ourselves. I actually relocated personally from Milton Keynes, where I was living initially, I think it was 1983, and moved to Bournemouth, and that's where it really set up. And I started getting staff and had people working for me to cope with the growth and converting the games, because Football Manager was popular in every format that it was converted to. So it was actually on, I think, 13 or 14 different formats in the end, and dealing with the growth of the industry, where it's changed, as I say, from being just mail order to suddenly being in the big retailers. And then we had middlemen distributors who were distributing the games to retailers, and of course sales overseas as well, and eventually need to translate, but maintaining all that, and then starting to attend more shows, bigger shows. So all of the growth in advertising, So it just grew. But I was running it. I was still running it. That was a problem for me to run the business and write as well.
Well,
yeah.
Boffin was an interesting title as well. That was written by a 17-year-old.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember now. Yeah, that was another good game. That was on the BBC, wasn't it? And that was an arcade game, I think.
Well, how did that deal happen then? How did you get?
What used to happen then? I mean, was we started to get people sending games to us and saying, "Would you publish our games?" So we would look at them, and some of them were good enough to publish. And then we started doing publishing deals with individual developers and publishing them ourselves. So we did that a handful of times with varying success.
Were we talking like the era of what was it, mainly bedroom programmers that were coming to you then, or was it teams by this stage?
Yeah. No, it was individual programmers. They were all individuals that had done their own game and sent through and say, "Would you consider, publishing this?" So so started expanding out there. It's an interesting time.
Well, Head Coach was a NFL kind of management game. What were the differences in doing this, and was it aimed more at the American audience?
Well, that was a third-party game. I didn't do that. There was a guy came to me. He was inspired, Simon, I think his name was inspired by Football Manager, certainly. So it was a lot of similarities, but he wrote it, and we published it for him. And that one, actually, a lot of people liked that. Basically, it was taking the Football Manager concept and adapting it to American football.
What were American audiences like to kind of reach compared to British audiences then? Was that like, I imagine expanding transatlantic must have been a bit of a job?
Yeah, I don't think we did that too much. It was only to some extent. I think we were perhaps too small at the time to really make that kind of expansion.
So I know you did a game called President, didn't you, where you were like a full country simulator, essentially.
Yeah, President was a game where, it combined multiple things. It combined being in the sort of running a country part with the fact that your country was in oil exploration. So you were as economics, you exploring for oil, and occasionally you were at war as well. And your oil exploration might get bombed by a neighboring country. So I had a number of things interacting together in that one. That one suffered a bit because it was launched at a time when we were transitioning to being sold. And so it didn't quite get the support that it should have had. But yeah, I did develop some interesting technologies when I was doing that. I remember I was doing virtual machines at that point to be able to handle conversions to all these different formats. So I did quite a bit of that on President. Well,
in 1988, Football Manager 2 hit the shelves, and it was released for all the systems in kind of one go. It must have really helped doing that President game before.
Football Manager 2 you're talking about? Yes. Absolutely. And I did use the same technology. So Football Manager 2 was on all formats. And I think, if I remember rightly, I counted there were 40 versions at release. It was a bit of a monster in terms of doing that because, I'm talking about the tape and disc as well as the different languages and all the different machine formats as well. And all of them had the same core of code that I'd written, the nucleus of code I'd written in Forth, yes. And with some plug-in sprites, animation code. Basically, it was like a virtual machine because it was the machine-dependent parts were done separately by. I had about half a dozen other developers working with me on those machine-dependent parts, but all of the AI, the control, and all of the strategy, everything was being done by this nucleus code, which I'd written in Forth.
And by this stage, you were owned by Prism Leisure.
Yeah, the company was, yeah.
How come you sold to them then?
That came about, actually. It was one of those things that just happened because I'd had a meeting with a business advisor and I said, look, I can't write games very effectively anymore because I'm sort of overwhelmed by all the business work I have to do running a company. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, what do you mean? I said, I was complaining about all these problems. And he said, well, what do you want to do? Which thing do you want to do? Do you want to run the business? In which case you should focus on that, or do you want to write games? And I said, well, I'd like to write games again. And he said, well, when we'll look at somehow getting rid of the business part then. And I happened to be at their offices, and they said they were going to go public, and they were looking for an acquisition. And I sat there thinking, do I say something? And so I did say something. I said, well, I'm thinking of selling. And that's how it came about, basically, step by step from that.
We hear that story a lot about people who, get into the games industry, like, from the creative side, but kind of by default, you end up becoming like a company owner and having to do the finances and everything as well, even though you never intended to do that.
Yeah, that's it. I was good at certain things, so that made it harder. I had a good sense of marketing, for example. But yeah, there was no other choice. It was. When I started, there was no publisher to go to, so I just started selling the games myself, as many others did at that time. They just started selling the games themselves, and none of us knew what we were doing at the start. We were all, I think I was 24 years old when I started the company. I wasn't very old, mature, you might say. There wasn't no choice. So yes, it's step by step. You're then running a company, but you're running a company for a creative product. I think that's the challenge there. If you're just selling widgets, maybe you say, oh, this is great, I love selling all these widgets. But I think if you've got a creative part, it's harder to give that up.
Well, the customizer utility was also came out as an expansion kit. Was this popular as well? Because you can make your own cups and stuff now.
Yeah, no, that doing it as an expansion kit, yes, it was very popular. In fact, amazingly, at one point, both things were in the charts, in the top 10, which was... the game and the expansion kit. So yeah, that went down well. I think that was a good move at the time.
Well, then obviously we had the World Cup in 1990, Italia 90, which I remember being a kid, and that kind of seemed like football had kind of gone to the next level. It was suddenly big and glamorous, and it just seemed like, Italia 90 was suddenly everywhere, and there was a lot of money being pumped into football. And you released Football Manager World Cup Edition for that too. They came in a big box, you had the wall chart and stuff too. Did you kind of find that worldwide interest in football got more attention on your game?
Yeah, I think the Football Manager 2 was actually the bigger seller. The World Cup was World Cup Edition was not a pleasant experience for me. There was it was very heavy workload, and it wasn't, it was kind of like I wasn't able to do it the way I wanted it, although it was okay. It was okay as a game. It was one I wasn't satisfied with. And I would like to have been able to finish the product properly. But I did learn something. This is something I did learn from, because I had a habit of, if you look at Football Manager 1, Football Manager 2, and the World Cup Edition, and some other things I've done since, I used to completely revolutionize the game each time. So I just write a completely new game, different structure, completely change it. And I think I made it hard for myself doing that. I think I see it slightly differently now. I would more evolution than revolution.
Well, it kind of one interesting aspect I found was that you could basically have press talking to the players, and it would reflect how kind of media savvy the players are as well, but also it would affect the morale of the club. I thought that really reflected the football at the time.
Yes, no, I was picking up on things like that. It's true. It does happen. And I was starting to pick up on stuff like that.
Well, you must have started looking at other Football Manager games out there and lots of management sims. Was this frustrating or kind of flattering to see a lot come out later on?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I always kind of, I didn't really pay much attention because I traveled, I've been abroad, and, I didn't really follow that closely what was happening because I've been doing other stuff. And I did keep along the idea of doing some more myself, and I've done it kept it going part-time, probably almost ever since, really. But I didn't pay much attention, to what else was going on. Occasionally I'd look at something and I'd say, oh, this is too much statistics, I don't like this. So I didn't really find anything that really appealed to me.
Did you manage to get a look at a Championship Manager at all?
Yeah, it's a different kind of game. Actually, it's interesting that people make these analogies because I don't. I think just it's about the same subject, but a completely different kind of game as far as I'm concerned. It's only the subject that's the same. It's like, I make more analogies to music. It might be still rock music, but they're very, very different, to different types of, different ways of using the genre.
Well, you must be amazed to kind of see the splitting of IDOS and them losing the rights to use the Championship Manager name and now using Football Manager. So you're kind of coming into a shop and seeing Football Manager 2019.
It's very strange. It's very strange, and I do see it. And it is kind of odd. But I mean, a lot of people did use the name Football Manager in different ways afterwards. But that particular thing is strange, and I will always will be strange. I think that's just the way it is.
Well, I mean, if people were missing your, take on the football simulation, then Football Star Manager has come along in recent years. Tell us about this then, and why you decided it was the right time to do that.
Well, actually, it was about 3 years ago. I was just online. I just had people who were following me on Facebook or something like that. I have a Facebook page, and I just got the idea. I just thought, I've been developing mobiles software for quite a while now, and I played around with doing a football management game on mobile, but I spent too long on that. I spent about 5 years doing that. Made it a painful process for myself, and then I suddenly thought, why don't I just redo the original game for mobiles? And I just suggested, how about if I rewrote my original Football Manager for mobiles? And I got a very, very positive reaction. Yeah, please do that, And so I did. So I based it on the original game, but it is a completely new game. And, there's some variations on it, but it has very much the same feel and gameplay of the original. I mean, same gameplay, same games designer, same games programmer, that has an impact on that. And people love it because the similarities are strong enough that they feel nostalgia, when they play the game, and they remember their experiences of playing it the first time. They get a lot out of that, but also the game has the same addictive quality. It's easy to play, but very much fun, and people are finding it refreshing too, because other football management games. So although I've done it as a retro game, I mean, I've even included the original players, the original teams, and things like that from the very first game. It has also modern players in it as well. What they particularly are finding is that compared to other games that are out there, it's much easier to play, and you don't have to work so hard, and they like this simple. I mean, one person said to me, I've played the latest Football Manager, the big Football Manager, and he said, I've spent 200 hours on it. He said, I've played 7 seasons. And I said, well, if you play mine, I said, and you play 200 hours, you'll probably play 200 seasons.
Yeah.
And I do have people, I mean, who've played 500 more seasons of my new game and enjoying it, and they play it, in their downtime on flights all over the place, because it doesn't need Wi-Fi or anything like that. And you can customize it just like the original. And I originally released it as text only, just like I did with the original, just to get it out there. And then I spent a few months. It was such a parallel. It was a few months in like August, September. A while later, later on, I think maybe a year later, and I added animation with the stickmen, and then I enhanced that animation with some sprites some months later. But in fact, when you play the game, there's 3 options. You can actually play the text, the retro sprites, stickmen or sprites, and they all work, and they use the same kind of, it doesn't matter which you choose, you get I can't say similar results because there's, the randomization is slightly different, but there's no advantage using either. But you can play any of the 3 ways each match. So yeah, that is a 5-star rated. People love that game. I'm very happy with it. I've sold thousands of them.
Yeah, I'm looking on Amazon here, and the reviews are amazing. I mean, people saying, I think you made a really good point there that it's still as addictive as the original. It's kind of like a good movie's a good movie for all time. A good bit of music's a good bit of music. A good game is timeless, I guess.
Yeah, and I've actually got it on a lot of formats too. I mean, I got it on iOS, Android, Kindle Fire, as you say, you've seen it on Amazon there. Also Windows and Mac, and it's highly rated on all of them.
It's currently 13th in entertainment on iTunes.
Yeah. So it's really good. And in fact, my view of it is that I produced a very good game again, and very happy with what I produced. And my only problem is just people don't know it exists. So the problem is a marketing problem. People don't know I've actually made it, and when they do, they're very happy when they buy it. But it's definitely a successful game that people are just starting to learn is there, and very much retro, but very enjoyable today. I mean, but the fact there's no Wi-Fi, people like it for things like going on a flight. They play it on a flight or a long journey and things like that.
Well, I'm sure anyone that's listened right to the end of the interview, Kevin, will be, dying to get hold of a copy of it. So we'll obviously put the links to where people can get it from in our show notes at theretrohour.com. And it's wonderful that you've kind of gone back to roots and are doing Football Manager again. So thank you so much for coming on, Kevin. It's great to see you've still got the passion for it too.
Yeah, no, I really enjoy it. Yeah, I really enjoy the work. I love writing the game, so I want to do more.
Maybe I could get Forest to the Premier League again. We'll see.
Yeah, and all they got to do is look for Kevin Toms on the App Store, so it's still my name. That's the way to find it.
Excellent. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for talking to us.
Been a pleasure. Thanks for taking me back through some of the memories.